Hey, it's Dave Brown here, host of Now with Dave Brown on AMI. Check out this latest highlight from the show. Two of the biggest issues facing Canada are housing and climate. The two topics are often discussed separately, but are they actually two sides of the same coin? This is a question that journalist Arno Kopecky has been considering, and Arno is here to share some of those thoughts with you. Hey, good morning, Arno.
Good morning, Dave. How are you?
Arno, I'm great. I've oftentimes described this as a little bit of a false binary, the issue of housing versus climate. Where do you land on that binary?
It has been driving me crazy, Dave. You hear top line headline, people screaming about the housing crisis, but never do they mention climate in that category. And then you hear people screaming about climate change, but they never mention housing. And I'm like, these are the same thing. So that's how I feel. Yeah. And I think it represents a huge opportunity for society and politicians if they can see it and grasp it.
And right in the middle of that, there's also just economy, right? Economic downturn, recession, cost of living, sustainability, inflation, and affordable housing are all part of that coin too.
It's all here, Dave. We've got the solution to society in our hands right now.
Okay, okay, I accept your broad thesis here. No need to get me on board anymore. But what are some of the solutions that could be put forward that apply to both those files, the housing file and the climate file?
Sure. So it's I'm obviously being a bit facetious. These are big ideas which are famously easy to discuss over coffee and very difficult to implement. But so in a nutshell, first of all, just to give viewers an idea, 40% or so of emissions, of global emissions and Canada's emissions come from building and houses. Both the process of construction, which involves a ton of energy, and then also once the buildings are built, the homes and the skyscrapers and everything in between, they're just emitting, we're using gas to heat these homes, electricity to run the lights, you name it, our hot water. It is a huge source of emissions. And now we have this crisis where we have to build about 5-6 million homes, almost 6 million homes in the next decade, before the next decade, just to keep up with demand right now. Because as you don't need me to tell you, not just homelessness, but also cost of housing, everything is it's insane right now. So if we can build these homes that we need, both affordably, but also in a way that is actually good for the environment instead of bad for the environment, there is a huge opportunity to tackle two birds with one stone. Now, Ontario just did a very high profile exercise in how not to do it, which is to sprawl into the wetlands and the greenlands that act as sinks for carbon and also are floodplains. So building houses where they are very vulnerable. The entire goal here is to build houses where they will not burn down or wash away in a flood or become hot heat traps when the next heat dome hits. You want to build them, you want to infill cities, so densify basically, and also you want to use materials that are, climate friendly, so not just clear cutting a whole bunch of forest to build the next 6 million homes. And you want to, solar panels, energy efficiency. You can build houses in a way that they actually feed energy back into the grid instead of sucking energy out of it. So I think that the climate and environmental principles, you want them to be both resilient, so they can take a heat wave, they won't be in the line of the next forest fire on the edge of the city, but also you want them to be not contributing more to the housing. You don't want, let's take that number down of 40% greenhouse gas contributor. We could bring that down to, 5-10%, whatever, carbon neutral.
Yeah, people so oftentimes look at densification as, oh, well, that's the Toronto and Vancouver model for the last 30 years of building one-bedroom condos. No. You can do density in ways that are actually effective and livable as well.
Totally. Yeah. Look, anybody who's been traveling a little bit outside of Canada and North America, Europe, cities like, Amsterdam and Paris, you name it, even Mexico City, there's a lot of cities around the world that have done this. They've got beautiful row housing. This is a matter of urban zoning, really, like allowing for density and also sort of building housing that will last 100 years, not something that you're going to tear down. I was speaking to a builder in Victoria, BC, who was saying, 80% of the homes that he demolishes are perfectly fine, but they're just being, torn down and rebuilt in the same way because somebody has a different vision. That's what kind of needs to change, and that's what requires real political vision to be able to zone and build in ways that will, these buildings will last for 100 years. I mean, that sounds crazy, but it's actually doable.
Arno, you said the magic word there. You said politics. These are topics that politicians like to talk about, but where's the political opportunity here?
Well, I think this is very, I actually don't think it's pie in the sky to call this a bipartisan issue. First of all, nobody has to mention the word oil and gas. We don't have to fight the oil sands. We don't have to go after the production. This is about housing and density and cutting through red tape, things that conservatives love, for example. And you don't hear me say a lot of good things about Pierre Poilievre on this show, but I will say that his housing plan is super aggressive, and he is really tackling NIMBYism, not in my backyard. So he's saying, you cities who refuse, city councils, because this is really comes down to municipal zoning a lot of times and urban jurisdictions. So Pierre Poilievre has said any city that tries to refuse to allow single family homes becoming duplexes and quad and increasing density, he's going to attack that in ways that I might not necessarily agree with, but the idea is good. And he's really promoting transit to these houses, because you can't ask people to live in car-free ways and then not provide them transit and alternatives like that. So, the conservatives are already part of the way there. They want to densify and increase transit to these places, which is a huge part of the solution. The final piece of the puzzle that conservatives maybe are not all the way there is building these homes in green manner. I think the risk is that you just slap up a bunch of cheap wooden houses, densely, and townhouses, but then they have to, then they kind of fall apart in 20, 30 years, and then you have to do this all over again. So the idea is to seize this moment and build these homes densely, but also sustainably, so that they can be, housing generations of Canadians.
Yeah, it's a quantitative problem, but if you don't address it qualitatively as well, if you don't build houses that are meant to last or that are so obviously cheaply constructed, people aren't going to want to live in them. So yeah, you have to be mindful of that as well. Arno, I think about the city where I grew up, which is Montreal, Quebec. You go through all these neighborhoods around the downtown core that have beautiful triplexes and quadplexes and row houses that are not aesthetically unpleasing. In fact, they're quite aesthetically beautiful, but they're also 800, 900, 1,000, 1,200 square feet. Like we can walk and chew gum at the same time here.
Yes, totally, Dave. Totally. I think it's slightly a new, sort of a new way of thinking for a lot of Canadians. I grew up in a house with a yard and a backyard, and it was awesome, and I think that has been the dream for a lot of people. But I think if you spend time, now I live in a townhouse, I don't have a yard, but I can walk and I'm at a coffee shop in 2 minutes, and I'm at a fruit, I can buy fruit and groceries a 3-minute walk away, and there's pubs, and it's just this vibrant cityscape. And people, I think that's a really appealing way to live once you actually experience it, rather than, these sprawl, these huge, when you live a half an hour drive from the closest school or grocery store, but you have this big home. I think you're making a trade-off there that people don't quite appreciate, and you have to sort of go and see other models of ways of living that to really appreciate how good it can be to live in more dense areas.
And Arno, you also described the notion of maybe be a little bit more like Phoenix, Arizona, and have everybody put solar panels on their roofs, right? Like anytime there's a new build going on or there's a new row house being built, we're not saying it's going to singularly create the energy efficiency or the energy production you need, but it's going to offset some of the needs.
Totally. These are incremental things, and there's no one silver bullet. And I'm not saying solar panels on every roof is going to be but there's heat pumps, there's solar panels, there's great insulation. There's so many things you can do to lower the impact of housing. Now, I will say that the thing that makes the gear and the wrenches, or the stick and the gears, or whatever the metaphor here is cost. It is generally going to be a bit more of an upfront cost to build these homes. Not as much as one might think, especially if you can get this stuff done at scale and, prefab, modular housing. But that is always the trade-off with environmental solutions, I think. And that is the big challenge is, nobody wants to put that understandably, nobody has the money often to invest in these long-term solutions. solutions. And so things get built cheaply in the short term, but then, like I said, 20 years later, you got to do it all over again. So I think that is the real challenge to this political opportunity, is how can we create these funding models and subsidize this in a way that it can actually get done. And that's, that is my hope and dream, that people can find those models, because they're out there. It is doable, but it really is going to take some creative and aggressive leadership.
Arno, time is not our friend this morning. I know you wanted to give some love to Housing Task Force. What do you say What do you say we actually make this a part 2? When you come back in 4 weeks, let's continue this conversation, because I have more to say, and I kind of feel like you have more to say on this one as well.
Great. I'm super into that. You just did my homework for me, man. Thanks.
That's fantastic. Arno, thank you for this.
Okay, thanks, Dave. See you next month.
That's Arno Kopecky, a journalist based out in Vancouver, British Columbia. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI-TV, or download the podcasts wherever you listen. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI-TV, or download the podcasts wherever you listen.